I feel like as empaths, we end up starting our healing journey by realizing that we're in an unhealthy relationship, dynamic, environment, whatever. And we end up realizing, like, oh, somebody else was a narcissist and they controlled me. We are choosing a survival pattern. I think when you are empathic, it is healthy. It's healthy to have empathy. We should have empathy and we need to. But when you start to identify as an empath in an unhealthy relationship, you realize I'm overusing my empathy. I've lost my sense of boundaries and I've allowed other people to control me or manipulate me and maybe even abuse me. And I think that when you wake up to the fact that, like, oh, being an empath has started to become unhealthy for me, you may or may not realize that, like, oh, my whole identity as an empath is a whole survival pattern. And it's not a complete, thriving, balanced identity to have. And I think that's important to point out because I think when I started my YouTube channel, I started to initially recognize that. And I think a lot of us who are empaths, we initially start to recognize that and we try to pull back a little bit of our power. And I think that we end up also fixating on the controlling, manipulative, maybe even narcissistic people. The thing is they're also in a survival pattern. So I think that you can choose when you have grown up or when you're around anything in general in life, maybe just as kids, we end up emphasizing one or two things in order to survive. We end up either emphasizing the ego, our public image, our identities, or we end up emphasizing other people's egos, people pleasing, like being really empathic and maybe having high morals and feelings in order to survive. However, you're still living out a survival pattern if you're trying to cling to just one or the other. You need both in order to be a balanced human. You need to have a healthy ego and empathy for others and morals alongside it, because you as a human are both. As empaths, we end up initially recognizing, like, oh, I was mistreated, which is important to do. You need to sort of unravel, understand what was right and what was wrong and what you actually need. And I think that for a period of time, especially this happens a lot, if you're in a romantic relationship with somebody and you're like, wait, they weren't healthy. You're trying to understand and also validate it in your body, in your mind, because you are used to being invalidated. You're used to your thoughts, your emotions, and everything else not being the priority. And so when you get the initial recognition of, oh, this is bad, and that person's a narcissist, it's sort of important to understand it and to really dive into, because you're starting to acknowledge your own body again. You're starting to validate your own emotions again, because the other person might have gaslit you, might have confused your brain, might have made you feel it's not safe to believe yourself. So I think it is really important to have that period of time where you're acknowledging what was wrong. But I think that there can be a point where we start fixating a lot on the controlling narcissistic people. And to be honest, I often find, and this feels like this is kind of true, like, it ends up being the people who are more high ego, narcissistic, manipulative, whatever, who have a harder time breaking their pattern because they've identified with it so much. They've made it who they are that it's hard for them to break their belief systems. But you can, and I've seen it happen with a few people in my life, honestly. I think it's so interesting because, I started my channel talking about this because I was like, like a little sweet summer child empath who was like, oh my God, all these things are happening. Oh no. And since then, I've had a couple of other relationships that mirrored that dynamic, but kind of got less and less toxic, meaning I also got less and less, I built up a little bit more boundaries, a little bit more of my sense of self, again and again, but it wasn't like a lot, and I think that we tend to attract these relationships because we keep attracting what we need in order to balance. I think the laws of the universe really are based on maintaining balance, right? So if you are unbalanced as a person, if you are clinging to one survival pattern, you are always going to be drawn to, probably magnetically attracted to, like, and have the most chemistry with people who are your opposite survival pattern. Or you are going to be so drawn to whatever it is that would complete you, to whatever it is you lack. And also, you're going to be drawn to whatever your wounds are until you heal them, right? So, like, we may blame ourselves. We may think we're dumb. We may feel dumb for continuing to be like, oh my God, I found another person with the same pattern. Like, they're a little bit, they're narcissist light, but it's still there, you know, like this person's just generally manipulative. They're not a full narcissist. This person's just controlling. This person is just really shallow. This person, you know, you're kind of like, they're not as bad as the other person, you know, and it might be, you know, I feel like you understand what I'm talking about if you've been there and you're like, yeah, I know this guy was at least listened to me where this guy didn't, you know, and you're just kind of like, wow, I can't believe that I'm still kind of just like settling for the lesser of two evils, right? If you want to think about it this way, what you're really seeing is just, you're seeing yourself get more and more empowered. And then maybe there's a point where you have bigger karmic moments or people or more toxic people who ignite you into realizing how much more you deserve. There may be the one big relationship that kind of trumped all the other ones, that was the most karmic, that gave you the most trauma, that gave you the most reason to want to change. And even though that's shitty and that sucks, and we don't always need that, sometimes that happens and it does have an effect where it does end up balancing you out. It helps trigger you to look at your wounds. It helps trigger you to realize, I no longer want to live in just my survival pattern. And unfortunately, sometimes, you know, as people, I've just seen this a lot, like with all of us, we don't tend to think we have a reason to change until it gets at its worst. And that's why you see, you know, whenever you wonder why people don't mentally, emotionally change, why they're not changing from the bad habits, sometimes we get so used to our bad habits. Sometimes, you know, there's not a big enough reason until something bad happens. And I hate that, but I think that a part of it is that our environments reinforce that. You know, like, you're not going to change into a person who really thrives, because also our society, our workforce, like whatever, like pushes us into survival mode anyway, not just our relationships. Our world is still largely living in survival mode themselves. And so if you're a person who's starting to acknowledge that you are living in a survival pattern, you are a little bit ahead of ahead of a lot of people who are just like taking that as normal life and thinking that that's it. You know, so if you are wanting to live beyond your survival pattern, and if you want to complete your whole holistic health in your life, you are probably going to be able to manifest and achieve things beyond what other people stuck in their survival mind, whatever they are able to do. So that's why it's important to acknowledge initially, like, I fell into the empath narcissist pattern. I think that we can sometimes be stuck, fixated on like trying to identify narcissists, like trying to identify, you know, abuse or whatever. And I think that the reason that we feel stuck is because we are still actively either in the environment around the people, or we haven't gotten to the point of acknowledging what our body really wants and validating what our body's gone through. I feel like, and this is something tricky that I have also been acknowledging the past couple years, where I think there's a lot of excess anger, there's depression that happens, there's anxiety that happens. There's a lot of emotions that you go through when you realize, like, oh my God, this environment, this person, whatever, was really bad. And you are allowed to validate, and I think it's important to validate all of those things within your body so that your body can kind of balance out, so your body can be heard. And I think that it can be hard to balance that out because you can be in a sort of jaded spot, which is valid, you know, which is honest to what you've gone through. But I think that there's a point where you realize like the most important thing is to validate your feelings in your body. And beyond that, you can decide to let go of the person, the pattern, the environment, and you can decide, I now listen to myself. You know, you can get to a point where you say, now that I've acknowledged this, now that my body has told me how it feels about all of those things, I can take those messages and I can set aside the jadedness and turn it into being self-aware, being aware of watching for those people. How can I learn from this? And like, how can I create the boundaries that I want now? Like, what is the identity? What is the, if I'm no longer in survival, what do I want my thriving personality to be? Like, what can I learn from this? You know, like, and it's been hard for me because I think I've been sitting in like a sort of like, I'm going to hear out my feelings stage for a little bit, which was important. And it doesn't have to be as big and depressive or whatever as I think mine was. But I think that the thing like that I would want to help everybody understand is that doesn't have to stick either. You don't have to stick in your survival pattern. You don't have to stick in your post-survival jaded pattern. You know, you get to move through those, listen to your body, and then create whatever identity in life that you want. So there is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. Like there is going to be a version of you who starts really recognizing things and moves beyond the jadedness and then realizes like, oh, I can thrive. Why do we often start our personal development journeys with recognizing who's an empath and who's a narcissist? And then why does that end up turning into like, now I want to learn the law of attraction and manifestation? And then you go down the rabbit hole of learning a lot more about spiritual development. This is how I initially started my channel and my podcast. And I think that from when I started to now, I've learned a lot. I've gone through a lot. Like I've also become a lot more interested in personal development, wellness, and actually coaching, spiritual and life coaching. And I think that coming back around to the narcissist and empath like dynamic, I feel like I've learned a lot about it and like I've kind of completed that. I think that I don't know if this goes for everybody, but if you're into spirituality and you have acknowledged you're an empath and they were a narcissist, and I think this was maybe a little bit more what we acknowledged a few years back, like people on YouTube starting to talk about empaths and narcissists, personal healing. And then I think a few years back, there was a lot more talk about manifestation and law of attraction that was really popular. And I feel like during that era, people were starting to bridge the gap between being really empathic and embodying what they wanted, right? And I think it's so interesting that like sort of naturally after you acknowledge the empath thing, the narcissist thing, like we start getting into law of attraction and how to manifest and how to literally be in our bodies. It almost feels like it's the gateway from being really empathic and losing boundaries into finally embodying and living as if and becoming the person we want to be. So yeah. So you might get into law of attraction, manifestation. So I kind of had like, I think a few years back, like a period of time where I was really into law of attraction and manifestation. And I could tell that a lot of like YouTubers, a lot of people online were also like, maybe the collective at the time was also getting into that. And then we all like started to get a lot more into like other things. And now the spirituality and everything is so like, whoa, like there's so much more. And like for me, I kind of like, it's funny because there was a point that I had over a year ago now where I had almost it almost felt like I completed the karma of the empath narcissist dynamic, at least in romantic relationships. And there was a point where I had dated almost like my last person. And I was like, yeah, I feel like I don't need to go through this anymore. I feel like this gave me another catapult sort of like situation where I no longer need this dynamic to teach me where I need to grow. After that, I got into a program where I wanted to learn more about coaching and personal development and spirituality. And it was crazy because like all last year, I had kind of like a sort of turning point moment where I was like, I think I chose to no longer be in my survival pattern. And then I chose to literally have a year where I was just kind of like going at it, learning a lot of different stuff because I was relearning. I was basically learning what it was. Like I wanted to learn basically the identity that I wanted to have. I basically was learning what it was that I wanted to be, again, after being in such a like people pleasing, like no ego sort of mode, I finally was like, I think I want to grow an ego. I think I want to grow one. I think I want to do whatever I want now. And so I had a year where I was like, I'm going to learn about spirituality. And I think that was really cool because I was also telling myself like, I want to learn more about my belief system. I want to round out who I actually am, like what I believe in, my morals, like how I want to live, because I no longer want my survival patterns to be my belief system. I want to grow a new one. I keep saying that, but like I think it was actually super healthy for me. And then I kind of like went in a deep dive on a lot of like spirituality modalities, which I'm going to share on the channel. And then I eventually brought it back to like my holistic healing. I'm going through some health issues, but I'm even like, I think that I have somewhat of a better handle on that because like I'm starting to heal holistically. So all of this stuff happened. And I think that it's cool because I think that after we go through these times of being in like heightened survival, like we can look at our lives, look at what's happened, look at our emotions, look at like what our body wants to tell us, and then take that and go, I think I can let go of the survival pattern. I have a blank slate. I can create whoever I want to be now. I initially wanted to write a screenplay. I wanted to be in acting and like to sing and to write songs. I still do a lot of those things. And I think that I almost planted a seed a couple years ago, let's say almost like 8 years ago or something now. And like, I was like, I really want to be in entertainment. I want to be a storyteller. I want to be making content. I want to make TV and film. And almost in the craziest way, I feel like I've been manifesting that by going through my journey. You could say it's your spiritual journey, your hero's journey. I think it's, either way, your hero's journey, your spiritual journey, whatever it is you moving from, the survival one version of you into the person that you create for yourself. So it's moving from who you were taught to be, how you survived around the world, and what you actually create and what you make as your unique purpose, right? I feel like it's funny because a few years ago, I had this inner need to be like, I know that that's what I want to do. I want to create. I want to write stories. I want to make stuff. And I feel like I kind of went through the exact hero's journey that I needed to fuel my stories. Like I literally had to live it, and I had to understand what that was and live it in order to create the stories that I want to make. So in a way, I feel like I was manifesting, which is really funny, when I planted that seed. And it was just kind of like these huge upheavals. Like, and I think that that's just what happens. When you have a goal, when you want to create something, when you want to become someone that you have never been, if you want to become the person who lives and thrives and you've never known what that's like, you're going to have to journey and grow and learn in order to become that person. And along the way, you are going to face your blocks, your patterns, your habits, and your wounds. If you want to create anything, whether it's like a business or or become an artist or do whatever you want in your life. And if it's not lining up with the exact way that you're living right now, you are going to face that journey, you know? And it's good. Like that's what we all hope to do so that we're not stuck in our pattern forever. Yeah, but basically when we go through these toxic things, like the lesson of it may repeat until we learn how to balance ourselves out, but you don't have to feel so much guilt for what you needed to do in order to arrive finally at who you want to be. Like, you don't have to hate the amount of time that it took. Like, it's okay to value some relationships, even though they had their toxic moments. As long as you are ending up where you want to, and as long as you're choosing yourself in the end, I think that that's for the best. So in the future, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the spiritual things, modalities that I've been learning, a lot more about personal development. And I do want to do more reviews of TV shows and movies. Like, I think I'm going to do more reactions than just like analyses. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, peace and love. Bye-bye.